Morning. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Annette Lieb. I'm the Technical Services Division Administrator at the department. Thank you for joining for the 8th Rules Advisory Committee for revising the state's groundwater allocation process. We really appreciate your continued interest, involvement, and contributions. I'd like to go ahead and get started this morning with introductions. And I am going to please start with the Rules Advisory Committee members who have joined us online. And I'm going to go in the order in which I see people. So Casey, if you could please start.
Yeah, Casey McClellan, a Umatilla County farmer, water user, and here on behalf of Oregon Wine Growers Association.
Thank you. And next we have Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation. I'm not exactly sure who the official rep is this morning. If you could self-identify, that would be helpful.
Good morning, all. Chris Marks here. I'll be the rep today.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Karen Lewatsky.
Good morning. This is Karen Lewatsky, Oregon Environmental Council. I will be off video most of the call. I have a fractured wrist and I'm not handling technology too well. So pushing below buttons off and on is not working so good. But I'm here and I'm listening and intend to participate.
Thank you, Karen. We hope you heal quickly. Bill.
Good morning, Bill Jager from the Department of Applied Economics at Oregon State University.
Lisa.
Good morning, Lisa Brown with Water Watch of Oregon.
Ken, I believe you are here in April's stead. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, Ken Yates, Policy Coordinator for the Oregon Water Resources Congress, and I'm substituting for April, who is on a business trip today. Good to hear everyone today. Thank you.
Thank you. Zach?
Yeah, good morning. Zach Freed with the Nature Conservancy. I'm a hydrologist calling in from Bend.
Let me just take a quick look through the roll call. Jeff?
Good morning, Jeff Stone, Oregon Association of Nurseries.
Thank you. Are there any Rules Advisory Committee members joining us online who I did not call on? Okay, here in the room, we'll start with you, please, Adam.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Adam Sussman. I'm here on behalf of the Central Oregon Cities Organization.
Thank you. Good morning, Jen.
Morning. Good morning, everyone. Jen Hubert. I'm a senior program manager with the Deschutes River Conservancy.
Thank you. Greg.
Good morning. I'm Greg Phillips, Pacific Hydrogeology. I'm a hydrogeologist and a water rights examiner here representing the Oregon Groundwater Association.
Thank you. Robin.
Robin Cook, GSI and Water Solutions. I'm a hydrogeologist.
Thank you. Just want to look online to see if there's anybody that may have joined us late. Okay, here with me in Salem for OWRD staff. We'll start to my right, please.
Travis Brown, hydrogeologist with the groundwater section.
Justin Iverson, I manage the groundwater section.
Ben Scandella, groundwater data chief.
Laura Hart, water policy analyst and goals coordinator.
Great, thank you. So for people in the room, there are copies of the material on the tables back there. The rules are organized in such a way that there's a clean copy in front and a revised version behind. So you can take either or both if you like. I think everybody knows where the restrooms and water fountains are. Our agenda today is As we have done in prior meetings, we'll start with a review of the meeting summary from our last meeting. Ben is going to talk about the informational sessions on the memo he developed for wells correlated with precipitation and the department's response to the comments that we received. We're also going to give an overview of the assessment of risk for wells in Oregon at different decline levels. And then we're going to talk about proposed rule language. We will have a break, I think, right about then. And then we're going to talk about the statements of need, racial equity impacts, physical economic impacts. We'll do a roundtable of the Rules Advisory Committee members. And we will take public comment at 11:30. So for those of you who are members of the public who have joined us, please hold your comments until the public comment period. And then we'll wrap up with sort of the schedule of next steps. So any questions on our agenda before we get started? Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Travis.
Yeah, hi. So we sent out the meeting summary from the last RAC meeting, RAC meeting number 7. So if anybody has any questions, comments, or corrections to that summary, I'd be happy to take them.
Questions or comments on the summary for meeting number 7? Okay, not seeing any online. Thank you all for doing such a great job on these meeting summaries. They are a lot of work and they are very comprehensive. So I appreciate everybody's work there. Okay, we'll go next to Ben. So with this agenda item, there is both a updated memo, there's an updated technical memo, and then there is a memo that describes the comments and how they were addressed. So go ahead, Ben.
Thanks, Annette. First, let's look at the major events that have happened related to this analysis. On the next slide, please.
Can I just do a sound check? Zach, are you able to hear everybody in the room fine?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, I'm happy to see people nodding. Thank you. Go ahead.
The draft memo was provided to the U.S. Geological Survey for peer review back in December at the same time that it was provided to the RAC. I then presented it at the 7th RAC meeting. Following that, we held 2 technical information sessions to cover the analysis in more detail and collect additional feedback from the RAC and the public. This feedback was combined with the peer review from the USGS to form the updated memo that went out to the RAC last week. And in addition, as Annette mentioned, we provided a summary memo of the USGS peer review, along with our summary of the questions and comments submitted, both from USGS and the RAC, and how they are addressed. That's in a companion memo that was also sent out last week. So now I'll review those major comments and how we responded. In the slides, and then this slide and the next one, there are tables, and on the left side are the comments that we received, and on the right, the way that the department has responded to those comments. And I'll go through them one by one. Numerous members of the RAC expressed concern that the analysis included water level trends that were not purely natural, but they also included anthropogenic influence. We agree and clarified in the updated memo that the sample was not really intended to represent just natural fluctuations, but rather ones that are stable over the period of record. So we agreed and clarified that. The next comment we received was from the USGS expressing concern that some of the wells with long-term trends may have been excluded from the draft analysis shared in December based on the choice to first detrend the water level records before attempting to correlate them with precipitation. We agreed and reversed the order of the operations in the updated analysis. However, to this third point, we did continue to detrend those water levels using their best fit linear trends over the entire period of record. And some reviewers expressed concern over that component of the analysis. The detrending removes water level declines that could be considered stable if a longer period of record was available and indicated that those declines subsequently recovered. To address this critique, we added a sensitivity analysis to the results of the results to this detrending process, and also more fully explained why the detrending is consistent with the objectives of this analysis. That is, detrending removes those trends over the period of record that arise from any cause, including a combination of natural or anthropogenic effects. So we acknowledge, to the extent that some long-term declines that are correlated with precipitation may be expected to recover, this detrending removed some valid representations of stable records. However, it also removes declines driven by anthropogenic effects that therefore do not create an expectation of recovery. This analysis is not appropriate for determining causation of those long-term declines, only their correlation to precipitation. So instead, stability over the water level of those water levels over the period of record was enforced by removing the trend over that full period of record. So this is another way of addressing this last critique on this table, where RAC members pointed out that the analysis does not address type 2 errors. It was focused on limiting type 1 errors, where a signal that is in fact stable is incorrectly classified as not reasonably stable. Type 2 errors then are the inverse, where a water level trend that is in fact declining gets erroneously classified as stable. So we discussed this in the updated memo and in the response to feedback memo. While the analysis doesn't directly quantify type 2 errors, even in the updated version, we do note that the structure of the proposed definition means that we can reduce those type 2 errors by removing declining trends from the set of water level records that were assumed in this assessment to be reasonably stable. In other words, detrending the water level records help to limit those type 2 errors. So let's go to the next slide. Continuing on with more feedback. Some RAC members asked for a more full explanation of the maximum rate of change of ½ foot per year. We added more explanation and pointed to the analysis of the sensitivity of the results to that threshold. Another comment, the second one here, suggested that the range of averaging periods used for averaging precipitation before correlating with water levels was too restrictive. We looked at this and actually agreed, so we expanded the maximum averaging period from 10 years to 50 years. The third item here, reviewers from both the USGS and the RAC suggested that the minimum span of data for evaluating the rate test in this analysis should be increased from 10 years to 15 or 16 years. We agreed in principle, but also looked at the updated results after implementing all the other changes that were added in response to the feedback from the USGS and RAC. And under that updated analysis, the more appropriate minimum is a more modest 13 years instead of 15 or 16. So that's what was implemented.
Hold for just a second, Ben. Karen, I see you had your hand up. Please go ahead.
No, Ben hit the topic I was going to ask about. Thank you very much for checking.
Okay.
Moving on to the fourth element here. A comment suggested that the rate of change over the period of record should be limited both for declining water levels as well as for rising water level records. And we implemented this suggestion. And finally, in response to a question about why the best fit trend was evaluated using the least squares technique, we recognize that the Thiel-Sen slope is a more robust estimator of the linear best fit trend, so we switched that method. So those were the major changes to the analysis.
Let's pause there. Greg.
Yeah, just a quick question. Did you find that switching to the Thiel-Sen slope method made much of a difference in your analysis?
It didn't.
Thanks.
So but it didn't hurt either, so.
Right.
I figured we might as well build in future
It
robustness.
just seems like it's a better solution than, you know, than fixing.
So let's look at the next slide where we just see at a high level, stepping back now, after implementing all the changes based on feedback from the USGS peer review and from the comments from the RAC, what happened to the analysis? A major increase in the sample size was driven primarily by the expansion of the allowable averaging periods for looking at historic precipitation. So because we were able to look at precipitation records averaged up to 50 years, that allowed more wells to correlate with those precipitation records. And also the choice to reverse the operations as suggested by the USGS of first correlating water level records with the precipitation before detrending also expanded the sample size. And that led the number of wells to grow from 236 to 357, and the number of resulting clusters of wells, which could be one wells or many, increased from 106 clusters to 160. So it's a larger sample size. At the same time, the values that the department has been focusing on as the major results of this analysis did not change significantly. The magnitude of declines rose about a foot to 25 feet. That is in terms of the 90th percentile among well clusters over their analyzed period of record. The magnitude of decline rose to 25 feet, and the rate of decline fell subtly from, I think it was 0.64 during the draft analysis, and now it's 0.59 under the resulting analysis. So still roughly 0.6 feet per year.
Robin.
Just real quick, I'm wondering if there was any major change to the spatial distribution of those clusters? Like, did it all happen in one area of the state, or was it pretty broadly spaced out?
That's a good question. I didn't look at that in detail. I noticed that there's better spatial coverage, like we filled in some of the gaps. But I don't think I can give you a solid answer. It would be worth comparing the maps, which appear in both the December draft and the updated one, for both just the wells and also the clusters themselves, to see where the number of wells was increased in concentration and where the resulting clusters are. I didn't sense, looking at the results, that the density of clusters was substantially different. And that sort of makes sense because of the way that the clustering algorithm was pretty greedy. It tried really hard to grab similar water level records and cluster them as long as they were within the distance and similarity in terms of magnitude of decline and potential match on aquifer criteria.
We had a request from the folks joining us online to repeat the question. So Robin, are you okay if I repeat the question? So the question was whether or not the geographic distribution, how the geographic distribution was affected by the increase in the number of wells and the increase in the clusters. And I think you heard Ben's answer, which is the maps are, one would need to compare the maps from the December 14th version to today's version to be able to do that assessment, and we do not have a slide on that here today. Other questions on this? I just want to acknowledge, so I was visiting my mother for her birthday during these information sessions, but I did have an opportunity to look at who participated, and I was really impressed with the number of RAC members who participated. We also had some water resources commissioners there. So thank you for your interest and your contributions to this piece as well.
I would echo that, and even attesting to the not the quality, but the type of engagement. It felt very constructive, the work that went on during those sessions, trying to really understand and refine this analysis. So thank you to everyone who participated in that and submitted written comments as well.
Bill?
Ben, thanks for all your hard work on this. This was a lot on you and for the clarity of your presentations. So I have a couple of thoughts or reactions and a question that might or an idea for something that might be helpful. I still think the issue about that this is focused on trying to avoid a type 1 error, and how that, my view, that that's less important, or should be that we should be at least as concerned or more concerned about type 2 errors. But I think in some of your responses to that question, I think I ended up pretty much where you were, and that is that the data, there isn't data available to do that kind of test to come up with some sort of metric or measure that would give you a 90% chance of avoiding a type 2 error. I just don't think that's possible. And so in principle, I think that is what we would want to have, but I don't think there's any way to do it. But that led me to so I still have a concern about this approach for these tests that that seem to do a very good job of telling us when water levels are within a range, a 90% chance that they're reasonably stable. But in those cases where we might see an aquifer that's going out of that range, how quickly would we detect it? How would we know with this test? And there is this inverse problem of being more sure of avoiding type 1 error reduces your ability to catch the type 2 error. I wondered, so what occurred to me was, gee, if we had all the data that you all have and took data from a basin, historical data, and applied these tests the way you've developed them, and said, okay, let's go back to 1990, say, in the Harney Basin, and each year look at the data we have in 1990, and then 91, and then 92. At what point would these tests lead to trigger, stopping the permitting process in the Harney Basin? The way I'm thinking about it, I think that could be really interesting.
Thank you for that, Bill. And I don't know that we have the slide here, but we did have a slide that we put together for the legislative information presentation that did identify how under the, at the time, draft 25 feet total decline, and I think we were looking at 0.5 feet per year rate test, when issuance of permits would have stopped in the Harney, and we compared and contrasted that to when the department did in fact stop issuance. And we'd be happy to share that slide with this audience as well.
Great, thank you. I'd like to see that.
Other questions or comments on this agenda item? Okay, I'm going to do a quick look to see if any other RAC members have joined since we began. Susan, welcome. Please.
Thank you.
Susan, go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
I'm Susan Smith from Willamette Law School.
Thank you. I don't see any other RAC members who have joined us since we did introductions. So we will move on to our next agenda item, please. And that is again, Ben.
Thanks, Annette. Now let's discuss the analysis of wells susceptible to being dried by long-term water level declines. This was a draft memo shared with the RAC last Wednesday. The primary objective of this study was to inform setting the maximum allowed magnitude of decline in the proposed definition of reasonably stable groundwater levels. So it's in some sense, it's companion to the work that we just talked about precipitation correlated wells. To do that, in this analysis, we estimated the susceptibility of wells to going dry following hypothetical declines of different magnitudes. In order to make it relevant for informing the threshold on total declines, the analysis was aligned with the proposed definition of reasonably stable groundwater levels to the extent feasible. However, I want to emphasize that we cannot predict actual declines that would occur under any given implementation of the rules, because those declines will vary in space and may be larger or smaller than the threshold on total declines that's allowed in reasonably stable. This analysis is a sensitivity analysis or susceptibility analysis to what may happen as part of informing those thresholds. In the next slide, here's a high-level summary of the method. We tested whether wells would go dry following different amounts of hypothetical total declines, considering the depth of the well below the water level. Declines were evaluated relative to the highest known level in the aquifer, not just within a given well. That means we considered declines that likely occurred in that aquifer before a given well was actually drilled, if we had evidence of such declines. This analysis neglected seasonal declines, so these are declines instead in the annual high water level. So they're interannual long-term declines, and the resulting estimates, therefore, would underestimate the total number of wells that would go dry if one was to also account for those seasonal declines. We did account for well deepenings and abandonments to the extent possible with the available data. These components allowed us then to estimate the percent of wells that would go dry in response to a hypothetical decline from that reference level. Those percentages were then scaled up to numbers of wells using the counts of all wells, including those that had insufficient data to evaluate their susceptibility to declines. That is, lots of well log records in our database don't have information about the water levels or the date when they were drilled. So that's pretty abstract. Let's go to the next slide, which looks at a diagram explaining the major components of this analysis. And it's pretty tough to see the colors. I'll do my best, maybe with the mouse, if this lets me, yeah, there we go, point. On the x-axis is time over the period of available information about water levels in a given aquifer. And on the y-axis is depth below land surface. Land surface is here at y=0. This blue line, thank you, shows the water level record idealized in this aquifer. So it is assumed to be constant until some date when declines begin, and then there's a linear rate of decline up until now. So this is an approximation that was useful in order to get a robust estimate of these long-term declines given the limited data available around the state and the sort of reconnaissance survey nature of this study. So in addition to showing that water level trend on this graph, we also have a cartoon, a diagram of a well that was drilled at some point after the onset of declines and before now. So some of the declines from that reference level occurred before the well was drilled. You can see the total depth of the well here. So the amount of additional decline that this well can tolerate is this Y tolerable from this water level depth when it was drilled to its total depth in this analysis. And the question is, would that well go dry given some hypothetical total decline from the reference level to this water level being assessed? And you can see in this case, the well that we're evaluating would go dry because that total decline is deeper than the bottom of the well. But accounting for these declines that occurred before the date when the well was drilled allows us to subtract those pre-drilled declines from the total decline to evaluate the additional decline that a well would need to endure in order to avoid going dry. And so what the comparison that we make is between this additional decline and the decline that a well can tolerate, that in order to decide whether it went dry. The fact that the additional decline is always less than the total decline in this analysis means that accounting for these declines before the well was drilled is always going to reduce the number of wells estimated susceptible to going dry, because this additional decline is less than the total decline.
Robin has a question. And Robin, could you try to speak up,
Yes.
please? Thank you.
Just a quick question, and I apologize, I didn't dive into the memo too thoroughly, but is the land surface an elevation? Are you looking at depth BGS or are we looking at elevation changes?
We're looking.
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, was this analysis done on a basis of elevations or depths? And the answer is that it was done on the basis of depths. So the convenient thing about doing the analysis this way is that we don't need to know about the elevation where a well was drilled. We only need to know when it was drilled and how much decline happened in that aquifer between the date when declines began and the date when it was drilled. So for each, the way that the analysis was conducted was for each public land survey system township, a square 6 miles on a side, we attempted to estimate this decline trend, both in terms of its onset date and the total decline between that onset date and now. And with that, all you have to do is then interpolate in time between that onset date and now for the date when the well was drilled to figure out how much pre-drilled decline happens. With that, you don't have to know anything about the elevations involved. What that means then is you have to try to infer this decline trend from available data. When we had data in the groundwater information system, we used that. And when we didn't have sufficient data to do that robustly, we instead looked at the history of water levels reported on well logs in that township. And if they showed a declining trend on average, then that best fit trend was used as the idealized decline history in that township. And if we didn't have any information, then we just assumed that there were no long-term declines in that township.
Thank you for that explanation of this chart. Adam, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks, Ben. And I can't remember is this the first time you sent this out to the RAC? Because we were at a meeting maybe a month ago in the Deschutes Basin, and a county commissioner had a draft of this memo that was waving it around. So I wasn't really sure where that memo came from or when it was released, but thanks for sending it to the group for some input. I know that one of my colleagues who represents COCO has asked you for some of the data associated with this, and I don't know, I don't believe we ever got a response, so I'm kind of hoping we could, in terms of our ability to review this, you could share some of the data specifically for the Deschutes Basin. That would be helpful. I think you got an email from my colleague Owen McMurtry about that. Is there any reason you can't share this public information that was used to build this?
No, thank you for the suggestion. And as we responded to Owen, our focus has been on ensuring that the highest quality product was available to share with the RAC for this meeting, ahead of this meeting. We're happy to share the data associated with this analysis.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I'm sure it's fantastic. I just, I haven't had a lot of chance to read this, but and we'll provide some comment, of course, on it, but I was just kind of breezing through, and this one sentence talks about, how the total declines may even be greater because declines will typically continue for years after the cessation of issuance of new groundwater permits, as if the cessation of groundwater permits, say in the Deschutes Basin, would somehow, magically have an effect on the groundwater levels, because there's a lot of other stressors on the aquifer that cause them. So it just seemed like there was a little bit of bias there in terms of, like what the effect of precluding groundwater pumping would be. So we'll include that in our comments, and I think you incorporated some of those thoughts into the rules that we'll talk about a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think as Ben indicated, he'd be happy to follow up with the actual data. I also want to note, Nick, could you please introduce yourself? We had another RAC member join us online.
Yeah, sorry, I had to take my kid to school last minute. My name is Nick Seiler. I'm with Oregon Climate Service. I'm the Associate State Climatologist.
Thank you for joining us. Are there any other RAC members who have joined us since we did introductions? Susan. We got Susan. Okay, and we will, Bill, in response to your question about the Harney Basin, Laura has found that slide, and we will put it up on the screen as soon as we're done with this presentation, with this agenda item. Go ahead, Bill. I mean, Ben. Sorry.
Okay, last slide on this, just looking at the results. There's a lot more in the memo, but the major points shown here are an impact of, or the susceptibility of domestic wells to going dry in the middle column, and all water wells to going dry in the right column, in response to hypothetical total declines from the reference level of 25 feet in the first row and 50 feet in the second row. So among domestic wells in the middle column, about 12,000 wells were found to be susceptible to declines of 25 feet, and that number increases to 47,000 with 50 feet. I'll note that the results presented both here and in the memo are rounded to two significant figures, just to respect the uncertainty associated with this analysis. Providing more precision would be inappropriate, in my opinion. Looking then at all water wells in the right column, about 15,000 wells are susceptible to declines of 25 feet, and then 55,000 susceptible to declines of 50 feet. You could look at the difference between those and say that an additional 25 feet of decline on top of 25 would then make another 40,000 wells susceptible, or per each additional foot of decline, about 1,600 additional wells become susceptible to declines.
Any other questions? Robin, please go ahead.
Sorry. I was just curious in the data, if you looked at how many wells, especially domestic wells, are within a certain range of available water. I mean, you think of the domestic well, you go down, you hit water, you stop. Did you look at how many wells are maybe had 20 feet of head or 100 feet of head, or just sort of what the distribution of available water in those wells was?
We did, and the question was if we looked at the distribution of depths below water in wells, both domestic and otherwise, sort of as part of this analysis. And I would say that, yes, that was the earliest iteration of this analysis, was just looking at well construction versus water level reported on the well log. And we realized that you get qualitatively similar results to what's presented here, but we wanted to make a fuller picture by accounting for things like well deepenings and water level declines before a well was drilled, in order to make this analysis most relevant to the proposed rules. But that was a piece that we looked at, and I would say that the results are qualitatively similar to what we're showing here and what's in the memo.
Susan.
Yeah, I'm interested. You indicated that there is at least beyond 50 a 1,600 well decline per foot of decline. Does it work the other way? Would we basically, if we went if we took total decline down to 22, would we reduce the number of water wells to roughly 10,000?
Yes, to a point. The figure I don't have ready to show in this presentation, but you can find it in the memo that the number of wells that's susceptible to decline is roughly linear, increases roughly linearly between something like 20 feet and even 75 or 100 feet, excuse me. So within this range from down to, yeah, potentially 20 feet, I would say that 1,600 wells per foot estimate is about right. As you go to smaller numbers before 20 feet, the curve bends so that it aims toward the origin, 0 at 0, as the analysis should, in my opinion. So it's about right in the range of thresholds that the department is considering for magnitude of decline in the proposed definition of reasonably stable.
So Ben, is that amongst figures 5 in the memo?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a fine one. I would say the better one to look at would be figures 3 and 4. On the right side, the y-axis is linear, and you can see that the line is basically straight, even down to about 5 or 10 feet.
So figures 3 and 4 in the memo. And let me see, I'm not sure who had their hand up first. I'm gonna go with Zach and then Bill, please.
Sorry to scoop you, Bill. I think Bill was actually first. But I'll just chime in. My question is quick. I hope we will talk about this later, but Ben, I appreciated in your discussion that you mentioned that the average cost of well deepening through the well abandonment repair and replacement fund was about $26,500 per well. And so just to put it into context, I don't think you say this in the memo, but just doing the simple math of multiplying out, the cost of a total decline of 25 feet would be somewhere around $400 million to Oregonians. And the cost of a 50-foot decline with 55,000 wells affected would be more like $1.5 billion. But I just really appreciated that you included that context. It's really helpful for me to think through what these impacts mean very functionally. So thank you for this analysis.
Bill.
Yeah, thanks. I also noted those numbers and did that multiplication. I have a couple of questions. One is, you mentioned this relationship appears to be close to linear. And I immediately was thinking, well, okay, does that mean that if declines have been happening for the last 10 or 20 years, have you or could one, I guess, do that extrapolation? How many wells have gone dry in recent years as a result of declines that we maybe can measure, as opposed to some hypothetical declines?
Thank you. I think the answer is yes. I would want to think about that a little bit more before being super confident about it, but I believe that would be possible. Relatively straightforward.
Okay, thanks for that. So I really found this document really interesting, and the analysis really well put together, and you make it clear this is reconnaissance level estimates, etc. But one of the things that caught my attention was your explanation about how declines will typically continue. I'm reading from a paragraph. declines will typically continue for years after the cessation of issuance of new groundwater permits. Such declines persist because the time to full capture of hydrologically connected surface water or the time to establish a new equilibrium water level is typically years to decades for wells in Oregon. And as an economist, I think about equilibrium relationships a fair amount. And that's, that's something that—
Ours are scientific though.
Pardon me? Oh, yes, right. Touche. All right. So, but given that, that seems very important in the context of thinking about reasonably stable groundwater levels and these tests. And so two parts to my thoughts about that. One is, with the data we have that we're using to assess whether an aquifer is reasonably stable, we may not have enough information to know if that's an aquifer that is not close to equilibrium. And so it's reasonably stable may appear to be the case currently, but over coming years and decades, it could look very different in that case. And the other part of that seemed to me, and maybe I'm sure this is something you all have thought about, in looking at a permit in a particular aquifer, looking at this test and data on water levels is one thing, but do you also look at whether there have been a bunch of permits approved in that particular aquifer in the last few years? Because that would be the kind of thing that would influence whether we can expect it to continue to be stable where it is, or whether it's headed to perhaps a lower equilibrium that could take many years to arrive at.
Thank you for that question. And I think you are right that there are many factors that are at play in understanding expected future water level behavior. And one of the challenges that the department is struggling with and reconciling as we propose this definition of reasonably stable groundwater levels is doing our best to protect existing users in the resource without adding so much complexity to the proposed definition that would be required to consider all of those factors, without adding all that complexity that would both make it difficult to describe in rule and add a significant amount of, say, discretion on the part of hydrogeologists that some RAC members have asked the department to minimize. The proposed rules trade off. They lose some of the sophistication that a hydrogeologist with access to an advanced numerical model would be able to look at questions of how long we expect water level declines to continue, considering the time to full capture of surface water and the history of both groundwater allocations, as well as the impact of time varying groundwater recharge. We lose that sophistication and instead gain simplicity and predictability to estimate groundwater availability using the information that we have up to the current date. And I want to give an opportunity in case Justin wants to add to that.
No, I think that sounds good.
Greg.
Yeah, I think one thing that is worth mentioning here that I've mentioned before, it's been brought up, and I kind of feel like it's an issue that gets swept under the rug, but we have problems with well construction throughout the state, and it probably affects areas where mostly the salt aquifers are developed, but we've got a lot of wells that are commingling, and the water levels in those wells are declining because of well construction and not because of overuse. And I think you can also find commingled wells, even in the Willamette Aquifer, where, you know, in theory, it's all one big aquifer, but we have areas where, you know, you've got enough separation between different water bearing zones that they behave as separate aquifers, and yet you've got a lot of wells that are open to all of those aquifers, and we see, I think, in some cases, we're seeing declining water levels in those wells because of this sort of commingling effect, and with time, eventually those will stabilize to, you know, sort of a new equilibrium when all the different heads that are being, the well is open to, you know, kind of equilibrate to a new head. And so, I mean, I think there needs to be an analysis, and we're looking at declining water levels. We have to factor that in, look at well construction, consider whether or not these declines are caused by well construction issues. And then I also have a question too. I'm kind of trying to reconcile this in my own mind. We're talking about total decline in feet here, and I think one of the purposes for this analysis is to show that, well, if we, you know, if we limit total declines in our rule to 25 feet, you know, well, that's better than 50 feet. Okay, maybe, I don't know. I'm not, it's not clear to me that this 25 feet of total decline that you're talking about here, you know, when you're talking about this sloping line, is the same total decline we're talking about in the rules when we're talking about, as I understand it, decline from the, you know, the highest water level to the lowest, where you could have a total decline of, you know, but that may represent, you know, this fluctuation within your dynamically stable range. So you could have, in effect, stable water levels still with a total decline of 25 feet. That doesn't mean that that water level overall is declining and is going to result in wells going dry.
May I take this one? Okay, so I believe I agree with what you're saying, and I will clarify that that's because we're using this for two different purposes. So this analysis comes in response to requests to quantify as best we can the risk of not acting. So we didn't use this memo to inform the rules. We use this memo to do our best to communicate the negative impacts of declining water levels on wells throughout Oregon.
Okay.
So
it's important that distinction is made clear to everybody here.
Yeah.
Attending this meeting.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And please correct me if I misspoke on, but
Other questions or comments here? And you will note, as we wrap up this meeting, that if you do have questions and comments on anything that's presented here today, we request that you submit them by the end of the month. So there is an opportunity to provide us some additional input as well. Okay, thank you, Ben.
You want to share the Harney Basin?
Let's go to the Harney Basin slide. Yes, thank you.
I emailed it to both you guys.
yeah.
Or I can share my screen.
How will that work up there? Here, why don't you let me stop sharing?
Let's see.
And then I'll pull it up on the big screen and I'll share it to there. I need to save it first.
We have, Laura share it. He's got it, Andy.
Okay.
Laura, do you have it up on your screen?
I do.
Why don't you go ahead and, how come we stopped the share, but this thing's still up there?
Because that's still my screen, but we're not, yeah. The reason I want to pull it up is so people in the room can see it, because
I think we can have Laura do that too.
She's not gonna be able to put it up there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I sent them the file, so it's the people in the room.
Yeah, so where did you save the file?
Actually, why don't we?
I emailed it to
In my
you.
email, okay, 1 second.
So,
That's okay. That's
Vision, I guess. I think it's the same thing. but it's not.
okay. And I need to come back here,
Thanks for bearing with us, everyone.
share. Okay, so now I think everybody can see the slide. Okay, so this was extracted from a slide set that we've provided in a couple of venues. I believe the first was the legislative presentation that Annette referenced. And this doesn't, I think, Bill, what you were describing was a more comprehensive analysis, and this is simply an example of an area where it was obvious we had problems. And the goal of this slide was to just go through a thought process of what if these proposed rules were in place 20 years ago in the Harney Basin, where we know we have issues with declining water levels and impacts to well users there with wells going dry. This is a composite hydrograph from the the Weaver Springs area, which is our kind of most dramatic example. And I've marked on there, well, we basically, we ran, and I think we went over this with the RAC a couple December or earlier. We've run the proposed rules with every hydrograph we have just to see how it would play out as we were kind of qualitatively looking at packets of these and saying, are we doing an okay job with things not, you know, rotating from reasonably stable to not, so on and so forth. And in this example, if we had been looking at these proposed rules, we would have stopped issuing new rights in this area of the Harney Basin in about 2007, whereas in reality, we stopped in about, well, not in about, we stopped in 2013. I'm not saying there wouldn't have been a problem, but the problem would have been less, right? As Ben mentioned earlier in response to a comment, water levels would still likely be falling, but not as steep quickly as they currently are. So that's, like I say, that's one example that's not your full analysis.
And
But
I just want to take that logic to the conclusion. There would be less people we would need to curtail.
Right.
Right. So there's that impact on the people who have developed and made investments in reliance on the rights that were issued between 2007 and 2013 in this example. Okay, let's go back. Thank you.
Yep.
We are going to move on to sharing the revised proposed rule language. And then I believe we'll take a break.
Okay. So back to our regularly scheduled program here. Wanted to walk through the final edits that we've made to the proposed draft rules since the last RAC meeting, RAC 7. First of all, want to note that we have not changed any rule language since RAC meeting 6 to division 9, 300, or 400. So everything we've done has been in division 8. So the 9, 300, 400 is as
400 or 410?
Or 410, excuse me. Thank you. 410 are as described previously. So looking at the changes to,
Well, hold on, we got a question from
Casey,
Casey.
yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
go ahead, Kate.
In Division 9, I still have a concern in it's 090030 that there's a statement, these rules apply to all wells proposed and existing. And maybe I'm confused about this, but I thought the understanding going forward with this was that it's only going to apply to proposed wells.
Okay, so thanks for bringing that up. Division 9 has two components to it currently as the rule states today. There's the -0040 set, which is about allocation. And then there's a 0050 set that's about regulation. We have done our best to not affect the 0050 part of Division 9. And so I don't have those rules up in front of me. I don't know that that was actually changed language from the original Division 9. It might have been changed in that we had to we reordered things. But the
no, it is clearly shows in the latest markup, and maybe before, to all proposed, and maybe you're striking, you just moved proposed, but so that's all, it was all existing law and you have not modified it. You've just moved the words around.
yeah,
That's correct.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
So there are other aspects of our work that will only affect existing wells or proposed wells and not existing, or
right.
I'm just wondering about the interaction between these various divisions, and are we creating a new restriction on existing wells that did not exist before our work?
We are not creating a new restriction on existing wells that did not exist prior to this effort.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to hear that.
Susan.
I was just going to suggest that if that issue continues to cause members of the public, even if not RAC members, heartburn, that perhaps there's a parenthetical that could be inserted that sort of showed which parts are applicable to existing versus which parts are applicable to new permits.
Okay. Thank you for that suggestion. Adam.
Well, in the Deschutes Basin, Division 9 doesn't apply. But, I mean, I'm just listening to this conversation and I just want to make sure I'm tracking this correctly, because I understand that Division 9 can apply for the regulation of existing water rights. But because the department has changed the definition, the factors for potential and substantial interference, it is a little bit of a new way of viewing the potential to regulate an existing well. Is that, I mean, it used to be those criteria were laid out and said certain things. And now we have a new list of things. And if I was a person with an existing water right, I guess I would be thinking that it used to say one thing and now it says something different. So I mean, I'm mostly just wanting to clarify that it isn't exactly the same as it used to be. It's the same as it used to be with a new set of definitions and criteria. And if I'm wrong, please correct me.
So we have also changed substantial interference, and that is correct. And in Division 9, Rule 50, the -0050, there remain the limits prior to controlling the use of any well greater than 500 feet, cannot control the use of any well greater than a mile using these Division 9 criteria. Those distance limits remain intact for potential regulation. So the distance limits remain.
But the criteria under 0040 are different and a different laundry list of things to consider than before this rulemaking. I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
We will take another look at that.
Yeah,
Sure that
yeah.
is not the case. That is not the intention.
Yeah,
Right.
we didn't make any changes to 0030, but we'll take another look to make sure.
Yeah, I'd just like to.
In alignment.
I think that's a legitimate concern, if it's not clear in the rules. So it sounds like what Justin was just saying is that certain distance limits that have been in place that apply to Division 0050 or Section 0050, whatever you want to call it, remain in place. Now, and I think it's important to know that that's very clear still in the rules as written, because I think we all understand that, you know, with time, if it's not clear in the rules, if there's some ambiguity, you know, and the folks that were involved in the rulemaking process, you know, retire, they go away. It's not difficult, you know, for other people to come along to make different interpretations. It happens all the time. And so I think we need to be, you know, as clear as we can to make sure that that doesn't.
Yep, we will take another look at it to make sure that's the case.
Thanks.
Let me see if anybody else has their hand up here. Okay. So Casey, thank you, raised some comments about Division 9. We don't have any slides on 300 and 410. Does anybody else have any comments on 300 and 410 before we walk through the changes to Division 8? Okay, and again, you'll have an opportunity to share any comments you do have, please, before the end of the month. So let's move on with the slides and the changes to Division 8.
Okay. Edit for grammar and clarity to the definition of annual high water level, just took a phrase from the front of the sentence and moved it to the back. We incorporated the 0.6 feet per year rate of decline. Previously, we had proposed 5, and then we had a X in there to hold space in RAC 7, and we finalized at 0.6, so similar but slightly different. We have not changed the 25 feet from RAC 6. We did hold it as a Y in RAC 7 while we were going through the analysis and receiving comments, but it turned out that that was the appropriate number. What we have done is based on conversation in RAC 7, we had pulled up this term pre-development water level. There was a lot of conversation about what does that mean? Do we need another definition? We have addressed that with this highlighted point here, which maintains highest known water level as a default, but allows for some assessment if water levels have been measurably increased by anthropogenically enhanced recharge. So if human-built environments have affected that annual high water level, there's an opportunity to set a different reference level using best available information. I want to acknowledge that the first version that we sent you had the evidentiary standard in there, and that was my mistake for putting that in there. We had discussed at a previous RAC that the evidentiary standard stood alone in its own part of the rule or statute or law, so that's removed here, but it remains preponderance of the evidence. So that is how we addressed the RAC discussion from RAC number 7. And that is the last significant, not even significant, last change that we've made to the draft rules since RAC 6 last year. So any conversation or comments?
Right.
Yeah, I think this is an issue somebody else has brought up too, but I'm a little concerned about using the highest known water level as the reference point, because, you know, it might not be representative, because it could, you know, it might be, you know, from a period of unusually high precipitation, for example. You know, so how, is there any way to sort of, you know, figure out those possible outliers?
Yeah, so acknowledged, and our assessment that looked back at wells with very long records, 20 some years plus, right? 25 years plus. We are assuming that within that we've gotten at least 2 decadal climate cycles and responses there too. And so we should be picking, like in our assessment of what's the maximum difference between highest known and kind of lowest known spring. The way we came up with that 25 feet was looking back at a time period that includes very wet years, right? 95, 96, 97 often included in that. So, so we believe that that's appropriate given the 25-foot value that we put in there. Oh.
Glad to hear that at least you thought about that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Adam.
I want to preface my comments by saying 2 things first. The first one is that Coco is very concerned about wells going dry, specifically domestic wells in the Deschutes Basin. But we also believe that is largely being driven by Mother Nature and long periods of water level changes and some drought thrown on top of that. So I don't want to give anyone the impression that we're, you know, unsympathetic to those concerns. Secondly, I want to preface it by saying that Coco is a strong supporter of irrigation efficiency projects that are going on in the Deschutes Basin. There's a lot of piping and canal lining going on, and we have been supportive of that 100%. But having said all that, I guess I want to acknowledge our appreciation for recognizing that, you know, human actions in a basin or a localized area can have an effect on water levels one way or the other, and we appreciate this addition. I'm wondering, you know, that this clause about considering localized impacts from human activities is on the total decline, but I'm also wondering why we wouldn't want to consider that on the rate of decline. I don't know that I can necessarily use a specific example, but I'm imagining with all the work going on in the Deschutes Basin, all the canal piping and lining, that there are instances where that could affect the rate of water level change. And so we would strongly advocate that the clause about, you know, considering other references, if you will, for, you know, human activity should cover both large A and large B under number 9. And we're happy to put that in our comments, but I think it would be more logical. So thank you for considering that.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? Okay, why don't we go ahead and take a break until 10 o'clock? Come back at 10. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for staying with us. Our next agenda item is to review the, let me make that.
Okay, we've got a hand up from Zach. So maybe
Zach, yeah, thank you, Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Annette, didn't mean to interrupt you. I realized I had one last comment and question about the Division 8 rules before we move on to the statements of need
Please go
and
ahead.
racial equity impacts and all that good stuff. Yeah, thanks. The committee didn't get a chance to discuss the Section 9, big B, little d. That's the section that previously had sideboards that would prevent a basin rulemaking from defining, for example, 3.1 feet of average rate of decline or 51 feet of total decline as both reasonably stable and excessively declined. Those thresholds, excessively declined is defined in Section 7, and it does not have the ability to be redefined in basin rule. I'm just curious, especially given Ben's analysis, which was really helpful. Ben's analysis showed relative consistency of the proposed reasonably stable definition across the state. It seems unclear why the department would want to have multiple basin scale definitions. And so can you give an example of a scenario where the department would advocate for the same rate of decline to be simultaneously both reasonably stable and excessively declining? And if you can't, then why did we change these rules?
So I think we changed them because we wanted to leave the opportunity for basins to do their own specific analysis.
Right, and didn't Ben's analysis show us that there is relative consistency across the state of precipitation correlated wells and climatic influences on those wells reasonably stable thresholds?
Yes, I do think it did, but it doesn't mean that a basin couldn't do a specific analysis and even gather more data as they do their basin planning work. And so I think we wanted to leave that option open.
Okay, do you see any conflict with a basin determining that a given rate of decline is both reasonably stable and excessively declining?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so doesn't it make sense to leave a window of flexibility like we previously had in that subsection where basin specific data, additional data analysis, additional data gathering could change reasonably stable, but just within the window that doesn't exceed excessively decline?
We will take another look at those comments. I think what would be most helpful for the department is if there are specific considerations that the basin program rules need to address, or that the basin program rules should consider in making their own definition. I think one of the things that we're trying to balance is that the basin program rules have their own statutory authorization. And so how to align the Groundwater Act with the Basin Program statutory authorization is something that we think would happen through the basin planning process.
Okay, I think that's helpful. Thanks, Annette. I totally support. I want basins to be able to incorporate their specific data. That's great. I just want to make sure that in doing so, they're not creating conflict between two of these definitions that we are talking about, and the two definitions being reasonably stable and excessively declining.
Yep, I understand that point. Lisa, go ahead. I saw you had your hand up.
Oh, yeah, I took it down. I did submit written comments on this point, and per your conversation with Zach, I can submit some more. I'm just concerned about the efficiency of the process and the sort of equity of it, and taking the sideboards out, which were already pretty weak, I think is just problematic. So I can put some more thought into language there.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you. Adam?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, I appreciate what Lisa and Zach are saying, and as well what you're saying, that some basins have a lot of data. They have the framework for doing collaborative rulemaking, and they have a lot of things going on that are affecting water levels. in terms of, for example, irrigation efficiency projects. So I would think that you would want to give the basins the opportunity to develop rules that make sense without prejudging what that.
There's also a comment in the chat.
Okay, let me take a quick look at the chat. The comment, Casey, do you want to offer this comment or would you like me just to read it?
Oh, I think if we're going to have the solution for the basins, if they want to go outside the statewide metric, is proof based on the best science available, why they should be allowed to do that. I think the flexibility is great, but I just hope that this clause is not abused if it's left in place. I prefer the Lisa and Zach's stance on this, that there should be very, very good reason that a basin is allowed to go outside of the statewide metric that you've done the work on. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll give some thought to what that, how a basin could go about proving that, I think. I appreciate those comments and suggestions. Okay, anything else on the rules before, and if others have suggestions on what that proof looks like, we're certainly open to considering that and hearing that. Anything else on the rules before we move on to statements of need, racial equity impacts? Just want to acknowledge in the chat that Karen also agrees with this point that we're discussing right now. Okay, I will turn it over to Laura, please.
Okay. Y'all should have gotten a document. It's combines the statements of need, racial equity impacts, and fiscal and economic impacts. Those are all statements that we prepare when we submit our notice of proposed rulemaking. They are ordered in the way that we enter the information in the Secretary of State's website, so some of the flow may seem a little odd or maybe not perhaps the way we might do it, but that's how it's organized. I wanted it to look the way you would see it when you went and looked at the notice when the notice came out.
Excuse me for just a second. I want to also acknowledge that Sarah has joined us. Sarah, will you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I joined probably about an hour ago. My name's Sarah Liliefeld. I'm an attorney at Dunn Carney and participating on the RAC on behalf of the Oregon Cattlemen's Association.
Thank you, and I apologize that I didn't notice you joined us some time ago. So please carry on, Laura.
Okay, so for each of these three statements, I went and pulled the statutory and rule language that sort of outlines what's required to go into these statements, just to kind of help us center our discussion a little bit. So as far as statement of need, the administrative rules say that that need statement needs to include why we need the rules and also how the proposed rules will meet that need. Okay. Got a question from Grace? Yep.
Yeah, I'm just reading through the need for the rules here. I mean, this is going out to the public for everybody to see. And I think I want to be sure that we are as objective as possible here. And I guess one of the things that struck me here, this one statement: while Oregon's statutes require water to be managed sustainably, scientific data confirms that groundwater depletion is occurring at a rapid and sustainable rate. And then the two references are given. If you look at those references, they are specific to the Harney Basin. And I just want to be sure, certainly, what's happened in the Harney Basin is of great concern and alarming, but it's not representative of the entire state. And I think the way it's worded here it would be easily interpreted that, you know, we were having the same kind of problems everywhere. We really should avoid that. I think we need to, so I think the wording here needs to be changed to something like, scientific data confirms that groundwater depletion is occurring in some places at a rapid and sustainable rate, you know, i.e., in the Harney Basin, in accordance with the, you know, information provided in Garcia and Cambridge. Something to that effect, okay? Because otherwise, it can be easy for somebody to take that and go, oh, you know, I mean, and I think that's already a perception problem that we have, even with the commission. Because a lot of people are responding to things as a result of fear. They're responding to fear instead of, you know, based on facts.
Okay, and so for everyone's reference, I think Greg's talking about the second sentence and the need for the rules. And I do have the PDF, so if we need to pull it up and look at it, we can do that. But I think I understand your point, and that's a good edit. So made a note there. Okay. We could probably go to the next slide, right? Because I think, yeah. So that I put this together just to sort of outline what's in this particular statement. So noting our statutory authority and directives focused on maintaining groundwater sustainability and preserving the public interest. Talking about how our existing rules are really inadequate for addressing the concerns, some of which Greg just mentioned, as well as our need to protect existing uses, and then sort of what our rules intend to, you know, how they intend to go about doing this. And that's primarily by adding or clarifying existing definitions and relying on best available science. So I don't, is there one more slide after that? No, okay, go back. Pause here for a second. Do folks have any questions or comments that they'd like to offer, additional ones about the statement of need? And again, we're asking RAC members if they have any input. You have until the end of this month to provide it as well. So, you know, you guys got this last week and you might need more time to digest, and we'll certainly take that input up through the end of the month and incorporate it as best we can. It's appropriate.
Not seeing any hands up online.
Okay, we can go on if nobody's got anything. Okay, so as far as racial equity impacts, this is a more recent requirement. There's very little guidance as to what goes into that statement, other than we need to identify how the proposed rules will affect racial equity. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. One of the things our department did is we did develop an internal template to kind of help us tease out some of the issues that might influence or contribute to racial equity impacts. And so we sort of focused on a couple of components. So one way to make sure that we're evaluating racial equity impacts is to do what we can to have a racially diverse RAC membership. We obviously have struggled somewhat there, but we do have members who represent environmental justice groups, and we also have tribal representatives, and so we do have some representation to reflect racial diversity. Not ideal, but just that's what we've been able to accomplish to date. And then certainly taking that RAC input, so any RAC comments that we get about racial equity impacts, we incorporate it as best we can. And then we also actually do our own sort of evaluation to talk about how the rules might impact racial equity, focusing first on who's likely to be impacted, and then looking for that racial equity component in terms of those impacts. I don't know if I have, it's probably the only slide I have on that. So, and this, you know, when we're dealing with prior appropriation, I think we talked about this in the previous RAC meetings. We have to acknowledge that there's a system in place that was sort of founded on racial inequity to some extent. But this rulemaking and evaluation of racial equity impacts has to focus on what the rule changes mean in terms of that inequity. And so when we're looking at impacts, we also think about both the positive and the negative. So there are some benefits likely to result from our rulemaking effort in terms of in-stream benefits in particular, and protection of domestic wells and more, to the extent that you find domestic wells in rural areas, and there's a correlation between economics and race and rural areas. And then also some existing uses are tied to drinking water and security of, ensuring we have adequate and safe drinking water available. And that also has some equity implications. So there's some benefits we see with the rulemaking. But then there also are likely to be fewer new water rights issued in the future. And so the ability to sort of correct from the racial inequities that exist due to the prior appropriation history, that's not like, we won't be able to reverse that history, I guess is the easy way to say that. So I don't know, does anybody have any questions or comments about this particular part of the draft notice? Greg?
Yeah, one of the things that occurs to me is that, the ability, there's going to be opportunities to rebut findings, by the department, the new application. If somebody wants to, if it's department's proposing denial and an applicant wants to rebut those findings, there will be those opportunities to some extent. But that can get very expensive, especially if it goes to contested case. So it's really going to be only the wealthy people who have money to burn or who have a lot of capital who are going to be able to do that. And so, I think that's one impact to, there's going to be on disadvantaged communities or people, which, as you said, there's a correlation between, economic disadvantages and race. And so I think there's going to be some inequities there because of that.
I'll think more about how to incorporate that. The economic race intersection is very complicated, but that's a good one.
Bill?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that's a key relationship, and I think pointing out the on both sides of it, but to me, especially in the context of this analysis of dry wells and how economics and race are correlated, and how the analysis includes estimates of the cost of deepening or replacing a dry well. There are a lot of people out there who don't have the money to do either, and so the benefits of reducing the number of dry wells that people in general, especially rural residents and those with low income, including minorities, I think you've made that point, and I think that's a really important one to emphasize.
Yeah, I do have some language, I guess, on page 4 about impacts to domestic well owners and users, but and the economic piece is in the next section. So maybe I'll put, repeat it, I guess, is the way to, really handle that. It's just to really bring home that point. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Suggestions? Not, we can go to the.
Can I just interrupt for just a second? So, I want to do an agenda check. We are ahead of schedule. So I want to give RAC members a heads up that we're going to do the RAC roundtable after this, immediately following this, before we go to public comment, which is how it's scheduled. We're just going to get there sooner. Okay, please carry on.
Okay, so for the fiscal and economic impact section, there's a little bit more to work with, I guess, if you will, in terms of drafting that statement. And I don't want to necessarily read all this, but we're supposed to look at agencies, local governments, and the public when we're thinking about economic impacts. We're supposed to rely on available information. I think that's a key point. So we don't go out and hire consultants to do a big full-blown analysis. This is, we use what's readily available to us. And we're specifically supposed to look at effects on small businesses. Go to the next one, if you will. Right, and so a small business actually has a very narrow definition. And the 50 or fewer employees, I think, is the key here. So basically, it's a legal entity. So it has to be making a profit, independently owned, 50 or fewer employees. Go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, and then in terms of estimating or examining the cost of compliance on small businesses, we're supposed to try to estimate the number of small businesses that might be subject to the rules, identify the types, and then describe other costs that those small businesses may experience, again, using available information. So in terms of, and again, this is where like the flow maybe doesn't make as much sense as it could, and that's because this is how we populate the little pull down menus in the Secretary of State site. So there's sort of a space to have kind of a general overview. So in that first section, talking generally about economic impacts, we've provided sort of an overview of the economic value of water, and we talk about the benefits of acting to protect that investment. Which this rulemaking that we propose should do. The cost of acting is somewhat unpredictable because to really know what those costs are, we have to kind of have a crystal ball and know how people are going to behave in the future and how, other factors might influence or alter the options that are available in the future. And then we also have the costs of not acting captured in here. And I'll pause there. That's sort of the overview of what's in that first section. I think I saw a hand. No hand. Okay. So does anybody have any questions about that first? So looking at your document, if you have it in front of you, it'd be the bottom of page 4 through the top of page 6, I guess, is that first section, just that sort of big picture overview. I can give that.
Not seeing any hands in
Go
the
to the
chat either.
Next slide, then, if there's any question with that. Okay, and then in terms of the small business piece, so the key components there, we've included examples of small businesses subject to rules. I am working with the Department of Labor to get estimates on actual numbers of businesses with 50 or fewer employees that they've got to pull their database and do some filtering. That data is not easy to filter by type. So I'm not sure how useful that information will be, but I am trying to get it. And I, will incorporate it if it is informative. In this section, we recognize that there's some challenges for new and expanding businesses in terms of securing water in the future. However, on the flip side, there will be more certainty for existing businesses that have existing water rights. We state generally, we don't think reporting and these other administrative costs are likely to change, but please provide any feedback if you have ideas otherwise. And same as far as professional services, equipment, labor. Again, not likely to change. And the consulting piece is a little squirrely, so but that could kind of go either way. So again, we welcome input on that. And then also we've had some direct information provided by RAC members that we've included in this statement as well. Pause there and see if there's.
Bill has his hand up. Bill, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, on these points, I think it's like the second bullet point. There's some challenges for new expanding businesses to secure water. I think we should be careful in not thinking that okay, the way that a business gets water is to go apply for a permit. The way that a lot of businesses or with other resources that we obtain access to that resource is by going to the market and offering to buy a piece of land or buy and transfer a water right. So the comparison, I think, should be between a world where you just situations where you can in fact apply for a permit and get a permit and dig a well, which can be very costly, versus looking at the marketplace and thinking about what it's going to cost to make an offer to someone else with the right kind of situation where you could in fact transfer that water right to use it. And so I think we should be clear that that's the way we obtain most other resources in business and commerce. And so recognizing that in this case, increasingly it's going to be transfers in the marketplace as opposed to new permits for new wells.
Yeah, and I do have some language about transfers on page 6, but the marketplace piece is one that probably isn't reflected in here as well as it could be. And obviously I'm not an economist, so I should have given you all that disclaimer from the start. But I'll try and think about a way to weave in the narrative about the cost of acquiring a water right on the marketplace.
Greg?
Well, yeah, I kind of question for Bill. Bill, do you think that that's going to be more costly or less costly to go that route? Acquiring water rights and transfer.
Well, in general, it's going to be, so the economist would say people look at the lowest cost way to acquire water, and if they're going for a permit, then it's probably currently the permit is the lowest cost way to get it. Whether the alternative is something they haven't thought about, haven't explored, or unaware of it, or it's more costly, that's certainly going to be the case in many situations. But whether the difference between those two costs is big or small is a question that will be, situation dependent.
Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. I mean, I think the cost of, well, first of all, it's going to be a real challenge, at least under the way that transfer. It's going to be very difficult to find water to be able to transfer. And with the adoption of these rules as proposed, suddenly the value of those water rights goes way up. And so it's going to be very costly. I think that orders of magnitude more expensive to acquire to buy water rights than the cost to apply for current water right now. And you still got to drill the well. you know, if you don't have an existing well on top, but you're basically, I mean, we're talking about the idea where you want to get new water rights on new ground. So yes, it's gonna be way more costly to do that, and I think it should. That's it.
That may be true in some cases, but
I
way
just-
more costly it's just not clear. You know, markets work, and it may be way more costly in some cases, but I think we can't make that assumption.
Greg?
Yes, I also had one more comment just on the wording here under the effect on small businesses towards the bottom of page 9. The second to last paragraph, there's a sentence in here. It says the likelihood of approval under the current as compared with the proposed rules will vary depending on requested aquifer location. I agree with that, and the quantity of the requested rate. And I think that's inaccurate. I don't think the quantity of the requested rate is really going to have any effect. You know, based on the use of which I think is you know, an overly broad use of and I'll talk about this later, but the Barlow and Lee, you know, when you're assuming that you know, the amount of pumping or the amount of stream depletion is ultimately going to equal the amount of pumping. And you even told us before, I think it does not depend on the rate of pumping. So I think that little phrase there probably should be stricken. Thanks.
I have at least one more, maybe.
Round table slides next.
Oh, it is?
Yep.
Other comments? Just look through. Not seeing anything else. RAC members. Okay. Anything else on any of these statements from Rules Advisory Committee members? Okay, let's move next then to RAC Roundtable. And I, as is usually the case, I'm going to alternate between people online and people in the room. And so Casey, would you mind kicking us off for final thoughts, observations, suggestions, recommendations?
Certainly. I think the RAC 7 and 8 sessions have been productive in driving us towards a better constructed set of rules. I would strongly urge the department and the commission to move forward to final version and public comment. I think it's better to get something out there that is not exactly perfect, but moves the sustainability goals that the department's in task with forward. Long delays are going to be injurious to our sustainable water resource, in my opinion. So anyway, I appreciate all the work everybody's done. It's been very interesting, and thank you very much for the chance to comment.
Thank you. Adam.
Number one seat again.
Do you want me to start this way instead?
I have to say whatever they said. So, how much time do I have? No. This will not be Coco's final thoughts. We'll have lots more thoughts, both in writing, in front of the commission, and et cetera. So I want to assure you that. I also want to I'm just going to reiterate again that I hope that nobody perceives Coco's comments or statements to make it seem like somehow we don't care that somebody's well could go dry, because that is a terrible thing, and we're very concerned about that. And I also don't want any of our comments about the impacts of canal piping to be interpreted that we don't support those efficiency projects, because we do. Having said all that, just kind of going, a few thoughts that I have is number one, I'm kind of going back to the early days of our RACs and appreciate the time and effort you all took to hear Coco's concerns about some unintended consequences that were going on with respect to the application of Division 9 to the Deschutes Basin mitigation rules. And I think as far as I can tell, that's all been resolved, and we're still essentially indemnified from Division 9 if you're operating under the mitigation program. So thank you for that. I still think that Coco is struggling with the concept of these sort of easy to apply, one size fits all rules, and how the application of those rules fit within the context of the really unique hydrogeologic framework in the Deschutes Basin. We've got faults and stuff going on one side of the fault and other stuff going on the other side of the fault. We got a lot going on. We got canal piping. We got a lot of things going on. So if nothing else, I feel like you've heard what we had to say, and at least we're making some progress by sort of acknowledging that human impact can have an effect on water levels other than from pumping groundwater. So we appreciate that. And then finally, while we would prefer to sort of, take care of all that and get it right to the extent we can in these rules, we do appreciate the opportunity to have an off-ramp for, I'm sure, a very vigorous basin-specific discussion, and one that really allows the use of the information that we have in the Deschutes. It helps us understand the magnitude and the timelines of water level changes that might be different in terms of timelines and magnitudes in other places in the state, and the drivers and the stressors behind that, so we can have as needed a basin specific conversations. We appreciate all of that. I know you guys have worked really hard, and I'm sure we'll have lots more to say in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. And then Karen, I know you need to leave early, so I want to go to you next, please. Karen, are you still at your computer? Okay. Bill, may I go to you next, please?
Sure. Well, this has been very educational, enlightening, and interesting. I've really enjoyed participating in all these meetings. I've learned a lot. I found it. I think the progress and the insights and the fine-tuning of the rules and all the hard work by you all has been very impressive. I think where it's ended up is very good. That the set of changes that we were looking at today are going to be important improvements. And I should probably just stop there, but I also think it's worthwhile stepping back and pointing out that I think what you all are doing and what these changes represent is, in a certain perspective, making the best of a bad situation, in that you're really constrained in terms of what you can do because of the way Oregon's groundwater laws are written. As some of you know, I'm in France. I'm on sabbatical, and I'm associated with a water research institute at the University of Strasbourg, and I've been talking with a lot of people and reading a lot about how groundwater is managed in Europe, in Australia, all around the world. And some of the people have been thinking about this a long time. They come up with 3 elements that you need to be able to manage groundwater well. You need a cap on total use. You need to allocate that cap among users with some kind of use rights. you need the ability to adjust that cap to circumstances in both directions. And of course, to do those three, you need good data. You need to have data on the stocks and flows, the levels of groundwater, so that you can measure the cap, you can measure the allocation, you can figure out when you need to make adjustments either up or down. And the problem that I think was created when somebody thought it would be good to take the prior appropriations doctrine, which was developed for surface water, and use those same approaches to groundwater, whereas we're not able really in 99% of the cases to identify which junior user is interfering with which senior user when it comes to wells. And as the analysis on dry wells shows, as groundwater levels decline, wells will be going dry, and it won't just be the most junior wells that go dry. It'll be a mix of senior and junior, and I'm sure we've seen that over the last 20 years in many basins. So it's in a big picture sense, there are larger changes that I feel would be needed to make it easy. It should not be so difficult to manage groundwater efficiently and sustainably in the state of Oregon. I was trying to think of a metaphor for what the current situation is, and maybe this is overplaying it a little, but it seems to me you're being asked to drive a car down a road only looking out the back window with faulty brakes and no reverse gear. It's the perpetuity or the perpetual, that once you give a permit for a groundwater right, having it be nearly impossible to change that. If it weren't for that, if we had permits where we allocated them and they were renewable, if the permits were for 10 years and were automatically renewed every 10 years, so long as the water level was seen to be reasonably stable, that could work. That could work well. That'd be effectively introducing the kind of adjustments that we have with surface water, with the junior water rights, or the way it's done in eastern United States with riparian water rights. But we have this way of giving out groundwater permits where once you've given it out, you can't take it away, and that's in a world where the water's underground, we can't see it, and we don't know what's going on, and it may be a decade or two before we realize that we've given out too many permits. That's an unfortunate situation, and I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know to what extent the Oregon Water Resources Commission can recognize that and deal with it in a way that would be more, that would give the kind of flexibility that is really needed to respond to information as it arises, and not be trying to wish we had a crystal ball, because we need to know what's going to happen in the future to be able to manage the resource efficiently.
Thank you,
So
Bill.
I'll stop there, but in back to my original comments. Thanks for all your hard work. It's been really interesting.
Thank you. I want to go back and see, Karen, are you still with us and able or interested in offering any thoughts? We're doing RAC roundtable.
She might be on another call, I think is what the issue is. I think she's there, but.
Okay.
Multitasking.
Jen, we'll go to you then, please.
Okay. Jen Hubert with the Deschutes River Conservancy. And I just want to thank Water Resources for the opportunity of the DRC to participate in this RAC first. And then also recognize and appreciate all of the very hard work the department has put in these rules, and the very thoughtful and thorough presentations and sessions that we've had, both on the side of the department and RAC members. We definitely recognize and agree with the goal of sustainable allocation and use of water, as we've learned from surface water allocations. It's very difficult to and very costly to reverse or recover from over allocation. And I'm just going to keep it short. We'd like to take the time to be thoughtful on our findings.
Thank you. We have more Rules Advisory Committee members who have joined us online than we have in the room. So I am going to double up on calling on people who are joining us online. So I will go next to Jeff, please.
Yeah, thank you. None of what I'll say is probably going to be a surprise. I mean, it's my free bird, I think, every time that we have these, but other than spending so much time with Zach Freed, it has been a pleasure. I think you did what you were asked to do with these rules, and having the views, while I may not agree with every view, I think having the views coming together and talking about it in the manner of which we have done so is benefiting to the process. And so I want to commend my fellow RAC members and the department for coming to this intellectually honestly and putting your perspective forward, because I think it's important. Just a couple things. I mean, we'll put some thoughts together in some final thoughts for you. Just a couple things that kind of highlight what I was thinking about during this last RAC meeting. I think, in my view, we need to recognize that each region and basin is different. And so we heard a couple times where things are tied into certain examples. I just would urge us not think about how this is viewed in 5 years, and make sure that we are getting it right in terms of our intent. Now, at least the intent of this RAC. I was pleased to see that prior appropriations was maintained. I think that there's a lot of things that ebb and flow, no pun, with this issue. Certainly with transfers, that's a big issue. But still, in our mind, this creates additional bumps in the road for groundwater. Now, some people would say, hey, that's good. Some would say it's not. I think it opens up additional doors and new avenues for protests that may or may not be that they're directly related in, and has it potentially an expense and delay. I do believe still this is a policy shift. And while I think that the conversation that we had is worthwhile having, I don't think it's one that an unelected commission should be making, and that's in the legislative purview. But that's me being cranky. I have a board meeting in 30 minutes. So I just wanted to thank you all for your time and the way that you discussed this issue.
Thank you, Jeff. Lisa.
Yeah, thanks. First, I just want to say, I've been doing this work for almost 20 years. I've been in a lot of rulemaking processes. WaterWatch has been in a lot of rulemaking processes. And I don't think we've ever been in one with the rigor and depth of this one. So I just want to really commend the department for the technical and the scientific work and running a process. And I would echo Jeff Stone that I think that the dialogue's been good. So I just really want to commend the department for the work here. I do want to address this Harney point that's coming up, is, whether we should be using that as an example. And of course, I've been involved in that groundwater situation for a decade now. And I think the reason, one reason why it's important to use that as an example is that it sort of shows the logical conclusion of what happens when you apply these rules. And it's a recent example, so it's not, you can't point back and say, well, that's what we did in the 1930s, right? It's like, no, that's what we did, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. So, you can talk about bumps in the road, but, we really needed some bumps in the road there before we got into creating these huge cones of depression that, of course, are super hard to address. There is another rulemaking process right now looking at sub areas and how to try and at least slow the declines. But it's a very difficult situation. And so I think these rules are in the right direction to just stop us from creating those problems elsewhere. When people talk about one size fits all rules, I would just point out, the rules we're operating under now, which are sort of have ended up being kind of a come one, come all for, groundwater rights. Those are also a one size fits all, right? And so we didn't hear a lot of complaints about those rules, which were also adopted by the commission. When they were leading to, a lot of groundwater permit issuance. So I think that complaint, I don't think carries a lot of weight. I guess, yeah, just the final point I would make is that we were very concerned about the delay in the rulemaking that has occurred. I think these extra conversations have been constructive, but I would echo Casey's comments that, delay just causes more injury and more problems. So I like the schedule that was sent out with this rules meeting packet, and I would just urge the department to stick to it. And I'm sure we'll have another round of good comments. So thank you.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, hi, Greg McCullough, Oregon Groundwater Association. Well, first, I guess I want to say I've been honored and really pleased to serve on this RAC. And we want to express my appreciation to the department staff for all of your efforts and hard work and things that you've done to run these meetings. I want to, I guess, what I'm going to say really kind of parallels the comments that I made in my last letter dated January 5th. So I guess would ask everybody here on the committee to review those, to review that letter. I think that certainly the current rules as they are, I mean, I've been doing this for over 20 years, water rights consulting, and I've always felt that the current Division 9 rules, were pretty extremely blunt instrument. And while they did allow us, to get new water rights, and I think they've in some areas, they probably work fine, in other areas not. And we did our best to kind of work with those rules. I'm glad to see that we're doing something different now. We're trying to do something better. And I'm impressed by the work that's been done to develop good tools to establish whether or not water levels are stable. There's a lot of good work been done for that. I think my hat's off to Ben and all the staff members that contributed to that. It seems to be a well-honed tool and science-based. However, I'm still concerned that, there's going to be a lot of potential or a lot of applications that where, there may be a finding that water levels are stable. And I want to make it clear that everybody understands this. Even in those circumstances, if there's hydraulic connection, those applications will be denied because, the other kind of major part of the evaluation, substantial interference, is relying on, in my opinion, extremely blunt instruments. the department is applying a theory that's described in the Barlow and Leak report that I think is certainly legitimate. It's legitimate theory, but it's wholly inappropriate to apply it to the complex hydrogeologic systems that we have throughout most of this state. And so what we have here is we've got reasonably stable water levels that we're using very sort of well-honed instruments to analyze, and most applications are going to be denied using this very blunt instrument that does not, in my opinion, rise to the same level of scientific scrutiny and analysis that we're applying to stable water levels. I mean, I think we can do better. I really do. And I think we should. In the way I see it, fundamentally, if the aquifer is stable, water levels are stable, the reservoir is not really changing, maybe fluctuates a little bit year after year, but for the most part, and these are vast, we're talking about vast reservoirs, okay? When you think about the Willamette Aquifer, for example, we're talking about hundreds of square miles, maybe hundreds of feet thick, and that whole column of alluvium is, the porosity may range from 20 to 30%, something on that order. So, we're talking about a huge volume of water that's feeding these streams. As long as that reservoir stays more or less stable, the aquifer will continue to discharge water to those streams as it always has. It's when water levels, are showing continued decline, I think that's what we have to be concerned about that. That's when the impacts on the aquifer are directly impacting the streams. If we have, though, a situation where water levels are stable and the stream is shown to be over-appropriated according to the WARS database, I guess we have to ask ourselves the question, why are those surface water sources over-appropriated? Are they over-appropriated because of impacts from declining water levels? Well, if the water levels aren't declining, then the answer is it must be other factors that are contributing to the over-appropriation of water from that stream. It could be simply because the Water Resources Department issued too many water rights from that stream, or have been issuing too many in-stream water rights. These are the concerns that I have, and it seems to me that if we're really concerned mostly, I mean, these two systems, the surface water and the groundwater, in effect, kind of operate independently. They are connected, and if groundwater levels are falling, then yes, that can have a direct effect on stream flow. If they're not falling, then again, the stream flow over appropriation is likely attributed to other factors. So it seems to me like if we're just mostly concerned about is groundwater available, we can rely a lot on whether or not groundwater levels are stable. And I think we could eliminate this whole part of the substantial interference equation, and not necessarily consider whether or not a stream is over appropriated unless there is, real clear evidence, actual physical evidence that the stream flows are declining historically. And we do have, I think there are data that we could look at to see that. There may be other factors that we can look at. But I really feel like we need to spend more time, and we need to get, if we're going to look at it a little closer, a lot closer perhaps, we need to spend more time with a group of folks who are, experts in hydrology, groundwater hydrology, water rights. And I really think we need to kind of devote the same kind of attention to that issue that we have to, analyzing stable water levels. So I guess I would urge that we put a pause on this process and have the department take a look at other factors, other ways that we could consider, the impacts to the streams from the groundwater, use. And, that might require forming a work group of experts. And, yes, it would require a pause, but that doesn't have to be unnecessarily long. I mean, if we're talking about months or a year, I mean, I think that it would be worth it if we can get it right. And I think we need to get it right. I think we don't need to act on fear or panic. I think we need to do this in a measured way. I don't think we need to delay it unnecessarily long, but that would be my recommendation. I urge that we put a pause on this and we take the time to analyze further that part of the equation, the substantial interference part. Thanks.
Thank you. Zach and then Chris Marks, please.
Yeah, thanks, Annette. I'll be pretty quick. I want to comment on process and content. From the process standpoint, I'll echo literally everybody else. Thank you to the department staff. Y'all have done a really bang up job on this rulemaking. This has been easily the most rigorous RAC I've ever participated in, easily. It has had the greatest reliance on data analysis, really appreciated the empirical approaches and using actual data to demonstrate that these rules are broadly applicable. It's a statewide rulemaking process, but the data suggests that these rules can be applied rigorously at the statewide scale. So I really appreciate how the department has incorporated feedback over the past, I don't know, 9 months or 10 months. I'm not quite sure. I lost count, but you've really done a great job reaching out to a wide range of people, including experts, and hearing what they have to say. From a content standpoint, you heard me talk earlier about the opportunity to reinstate sideboards around basin rulemaking in Division 8. I think that's consistent with the rest of this process, which is to follow the best currently available science. It'll also prevent conflict between two terms defined in rule. That said, I'm really impressed and I'm really pleased overall with where these rules ended up. I think, like Adam, I was going back and looking at our early meetings and reminding myself what we were talking about back in March and April of 2023. And I think that the rules that we currently have proposed in front of us are going to achieve the stated objectives that we started with at the very beginning of this process. They're going to be more sustainable for the resource. They're going to be more protective of existing water users. And they're based in law and they're based in science. And I think that's what Oregon's aquifers and ecosystems really need right now, especially in the face of a changing climate. So thank you for including me in this RAC process. I really appreciate being part of the conversation, and I'll look forward to continuing this chat in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Marks.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. So for the process, I think it has been amazingly rigorous. And, I came in late of the process, missed most of it. But the way the department has done this process really allowed me to catch up. That is not this, I don't find that in other rulemaking processes that I've been engaged in the past. And so just a big thanks to the process and all the hard work that went into that. I would also second a lot of the notions that this has been very responsive to existing authority, the realities on the ground, the direction from the commission, input from the RAC that I've heard. And again, like was just stated, the goals of the process. And so big thanks for the rigor, the technical, science-based approach to this. And to be honest, I think you guys are setting a bar for yourselves. This is something that is going to continue to happen as we recognize other portions of existing law that we need to address to ensure that we're meeting existing and current needs. And so I think this is a really good bar to set here for the issues that we're going to see in the future. And so big thanks. Last piece, I do think that we are ready to proceed per the schedule. Based on some of the comments, yes, things can always, we can add more to the equation and potentially hone down on some answers. But I think the longer we wait, as has been mentioned before, the more impacts to the interests that I represent. And so appreciate all this work and definitely believe that it's ready to proceed. Thanks.
Thank you. Robin.
I'm gonna ask this hard.
Oh, there's a few more people online.
I just want to recognize the big lift that you guys have undertaken here, and thanks to Ben and the groundwater section for all the work that you've done. And I appreciate being involved in the process and look forward to what comes next. It's going to be a very interesting time in Oregon water. And I'm not sure we're exactly there yet, but Greg pointed out, I would love to have a really great tool to be able to evaluate that interaction with surface water, and I still kind of wrap my head around that part of it and how to best do that. But thank you, and I appreciate all the work.
Thank you. Susan and then Nick. Susan, did you want to provide any closing thoughts? You are still muted.
Okay, there we go. I want to echo how incredibly responsive that I've found the department to comments on the RAC, comments of the RAC. And I think it's manifest in the fact that you've created rules that are responsive with respect to basin flexibility, and as well as I think really accommodate data that would suggest the effects of aquifer recharge and storage. So I think there have been some concrete changes in the rules that deal with issues that were very important to people. I'm just incredibly supportive of the charge that the department was given, which was to protect senior water rights holders and to assure the sustainability of Oregon's groundwater. I think those are incredibly important goals, and that the rules that have emerged, or the proposed rules that have emerged from this process, achieve those goals, at least to the maximum extent that really we can do at this point. They're not perfect, I'm sure. There are many other factors you could bring in, but the bottom line is that delays and pauses to try to perfect the rules further are really unnecessary. The rules are good as they are. And I think they achieve the social goals of the commission. I think I want to talk just a little bit about stability of groundwater levels. Indicates that there's really no validity to the, oh, by the way, further groundwater will not hurt surface waters or surface right holders in places where we have over appropriated surface water. I can't believe that people really believe that, because what we know is that under these standards, we will still, in places like Harney County, have years of declines before these rules will stop new groundwater permits. And so where we've got real declines occurring, but we're not detecting them in a sense, we are going ahead and hurting surface water rights holders. And so I just don't think a pause is justified. I'm apart from being the standard stakeholder. And so I've kind of stood back on the last 10 months and said, okay, so really what's going on here? And I think there are two things going on. I think there are people who end up relying on groundwater because they don't have senior water rights. And this is a way for them to get water. Even if it's to the detriment of seniors. And to some extent, I draw on my background in the Klamath Basin. It's the establishment of senior in-stream water rights that is that people find difficult. Agricultural interests sometimes have lost out on surface waters. They've become junior to in-stream flows. And this has been a convenient way for them to continue to get water. And then people who make money off of that, getting new groundwater permits, want that process to continue. I understand why people would be in those positions, but it's contrary to the public interest. The public interest really is in protecting the senior water rights holders and having the department and the legislature create better ways to facilitate transfers of those water rights. Really create, good water banks and that sort of thing. It's contrary to the interests of our children and grandchildren to have these declines in groundwater. So even though I understand the motivations, and it's not, they are contrary to the public interest. And it would be contrary to the public interest for the department not to propose these rules at this point. That's it. I think you guys have done a fabulous job.
Thank you, Susan. Nick, I think you are our final RAC member
All right.
for perspective and comment today.
I'll keep it short then. I mean, obviously I'm not an expert on water rights or hydrogeology, so, I haven't had that much to contribute here, but I will say, it's also been my first RAC, so I have nothing to compare it to. But I've been super impressed with the analyses the department's presented, especially the ones that Ben has presented. And I've been really impressed with the way that you've tried to account for long-term natural climate variability in your making of the rules. And I think you've done a really good job. So thanks.
And my apologies, Ken Yates, I neglected to call on you. I know you're here in April's stead, so please, if you have any perspective you would like to share before we go to public comment, please do so.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Just very briefly, we will be commenting at the public hearing and in written comments, and appreciate the effort that has been made by the department, but we continue to have concerns and we will express those in due course as we have throughout this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other Rules Advisory Committee members or proxies who are here today who I have not called on for the roundtable? Okay, with that, I have noted we have 2 people who have signed up for public comment, and I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Yeah, and quick poll of folks in here. Okay, so
Oh, 3. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Glenn.
Great. How about we start online and we'll go to you and then back online. So can we start with Colleen Roberts, please?
Yes, thank you. I'm Colleen Roberts. I'm a Jackson County Commissioner, and I appreciate the time to provide public comment. Our board provided written comment on the 18th, and we kind of agree with the recommendation. If there's more information that experts can provide, hydrologists, and it takes a little more time, then the need to get this right, we support that very much. Water is a huge and vital resource in our county as a beneficial use of the water. Our agriculture, of course, is big here as well. And there is huge differences between the various basins, and I don't know that's been addressed. I sure appreciate the discussion in talking about that and the need to consider the various basins across our state and how those will be addressed by the rulemaking or affected is a concern. And also, I appreciate the discussion about who's going to be impacted by the proposed rules, the unintended consequences. There will be those, and I just think moving forward on rulemaking without addressing these are putting the cart before the horse. And I certainly appreciate Jeff Stone's comments on these in there is no hurry in addressing if there is some adverse impacts without considering all the issues. But I just think basically rushing forward without considering all the concerns, expert hydrologist information that may be lacking, that may be beneficial, just does a disservice to all the citizens of our great state. But I sure appreciate the great conversation I heard today, and I will certainly Zoom any other meetings I can get to, because I think water is definitely a cohesive delivery system in our entire state and a huge issue in Southern Oregon. And thank you for letting me provide comment today.
Thank you, Colleen. Let's go to Glenn.
Yeah, Glenn Barrett, down at Bonanza. So the first thing that we haven't really heard too much about is interstate cooperation. 690-410-0040 requires the commission or the department to look at interstate cooperation when adopting these rules. Now, I don't think these adopted rules will affect California much down the Klamath Basin, but California's water pumping will affect Oregon's water rights under these new rules because of the Kona depression and the change of use. So I think somehow I would like to see the department reach out to California and show the impacts this might have with the neighboring state and how their use interferes with us under these new rules. It was brought up today. I'm glad it was brought up today about the existing water rights. I said that on almost every meeting. And you said you were going to look for that on the 0040. But 0050 under Division 9 on groundwater controls clearly states that it will control or regulate groundwater on existing groundwater appropriations that might have substantial undue interference. Again, you're using new terminology and new definitions for those on existing water rights when it comes to control. And that brings up if the commission changes the method used to control existing water rights compared to what they were originally controlled under, it may violate 536-320, which clearly states the commission cannot change something in midstream on an existing water right. So I think revisiting that with the department is crucial. I'm wondering if we missed an opportunity to really look at exempt wells, and because you can have a water right, a new water right application for 160 acres of pasture, but yet you allow a 160-acre development that might have 2-acre ranchettes that irrigate all the acres, and it gets to be put through. And I think, you really can't control those things unless you're in a critical groundwater. So I'm wondering if we missed the opportunity to bring up that criteria and how it affects those future water rights. I'm pretty sure that's, oh, Greg's comments regarding professional committee. I really like that idea. You know, I'm all in favor of protecting groundwater, and it probably seems like I'm all in favor of using it, but I think getting it right is key. And where we've relied on these rules, we're relying on other people's written publications instead of getting specifics within the department. So someone can really clearly see how we're going to be able to go forward with rules and be able to use the water. I think having that professional committee is good. And if it takes another 6 months, it takes another 6 months, but I think that's crucial. I want to thank the department for allowing me that's not on the committee to speak every time, and you've been responsive, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Bittner, you're up.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, well, hey, I'll be really quick. Member of the public, Mike Bittner, City of Bend Utilities Director, also Cocoa City. I just want to say thank you to the RAC members, all of you, not just Adam. We know you've been working together hard here over the last 8 months to get us to some level of a finish line, and I think we've done some really great work here. So I do really appreciate it. Hopefully, some high fives and cold beverages are in your future. Thank you, Annette, to you and your team for just being accessible and responsive throughout the process. We know early on, I think we were really worried as Cocoa Cities. I think we still are to a degree, but you've really, you and your team have worked hard to hear our concerns and I think address those. We appreciate that. We appreciate you extending the process to the 7th and 8th RAC meeting. Some of the foundational science that I think we heard at the last meeting and the opportunity to kind of get some clarification through the technical sessions, that was really important for us. And I think if I had one critique, I think if I look back at the process, I would have loved to have done that during meeting 1 or 2 or 3, kind of have that foundational understanding of science and really some consensus around the problem, you know, because I think maybe halfway through this process, I realized that we're looking at this problem quite differently, you know, depending on your basin. So, but that's it. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate all the work. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anybody else online or here in person that has public comment? And I think because we noticed it for 11:30, we'll have to check right at 11:30. Just
Glenn has
anybody
another
can-
comment.
Okay,
Yeah, Glenn Barrett again.
no problem.
I'll be brief. On statement of need, and I'm sure this is going to come up during your public comment, so I think addressing it now may be beneficial to spell out the existing tools that you currently have, the department currently has, and why those don't work. And so get ahead of the comments on that.
Okay, that's a good note. Thanks. Greg.
Yeah, I'd just like to make one final comment. There was another RAC member that made some comments that I don't know whether they were directed at me, but it was sort of directed at least at people who make money from this process. And you know, that could apply to me, and I just want to make it clear that everybody understands that I'm not here, you know, with my objections to these rules because of the way it could affect my business. Nothing could be further from the truth. I don't think it's going to have any effect on my business. In fact, you know, it just means that if I got to do more transfer applications, you know, it's all going to be kind of the same, really. I'm here because I'm advocating for, well, I'm representing the Groundwater Association. But I'm also here advocating for my clients who are the farmers, you know, the growers, the people that are out there producing the food and the fiber that we need. So I just wanted to clarify that.
I think we have a couple more slides. We'll come back and check in and make sure there's no more. We'll do the schedule and steps for folks.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, that's okay. That's okay. I just need to share. this. Oh, yeah, there's no button. Okay, and then. Schedule.
All right, so, okay, so we're, I think, done with the left-handed dot that runs through the RAC meetings. We're still targeting March 1st for putting out the notice of proposed rulemaking. 90-day public comment period, so ending on June 1st. We've got public hearings. I have a slide with the dates and the locations coming up in a second. We'll review those comments during early part of the summer, and then late summer, we hope to bring to the commission for their consideration at that September meeting, which would give us an effective date by October 1st. So, okay. So written comments during the, once we publish the notice, we'll accept those March 1st through June 1st. And we're going to convene 4 hearings. These are the dates that we've got. April 4th will be in Bend, Deschutes County. We'll be using one of their facilities. April 18th will Grand. That'll be at Eastern Oregon University. May 16th, Central Point. That'll be at the Jackson County Auditorium. And then May 21st, Salem. That'll be in this room. We plan to hold an informational session prior to those public hearings. We'll record all the hearings and post them on our website as well. And I think, unless anybody had questions about the hearings or nothing, no questions. Okay. And then we ask that you provide us any final input for our consideration and incorporating in that notice of proposed rulemaking by the end of the month, January 31st. And we'll work on the meeting summary and get that out to you. Our plan is to get it done before public comment period starts, but we're going to be focused on reviewing the comments that we get back from you in the meantime. So, does anybody have any questions about schedule or wrap up kind of stuff?
Not seeing any hands raised online.
Okay. So I guess,
Actually, I got
yeah, okay, yeah.
The public hearings, will there be members of the commission at those?
We do not know that. That'll be up to them. Yeah. There will not be a quorum of commissioners.
Right.
Yeah, and so just wanted to check back in to make sure we didn't have any other public comments since we're ahead of schedule here. And then I don't know if Karen, if you're still.
She sent me a private
Oh,
message.
she did? Okay.
Yeah. We are giving you some time back.
Yeah.
Since we went over last time. So thank you all. We really appreciate your contributions. I also just want to acknowledge all the people who listened in on our meeting today. We had quite a few people and appreciate the interest and the contributions. So thank you very much.